The topic actually is economy and communion. I was happy when the friar was making the introduction and mentioned this, right? That God had to be everything and he nothing in order to live well. And in the economy, we have to do the same thing, right? Here on the farm, we have to do that. We know that we are not professionals, that we don't know how to run an economy. Nowadays, so many industries, so many things. So many fathers who have such difficulty supporting their families, right? And we are opening farms and managing to help so many young people, so many things. It's because we do what the friar just mentioned at the beginning. We let God live among us. If God lives among us, who is a better professional than him? Who can attract more providence than him? Who can teach us how to live? The economy can inspire communion because right? So it was very good that the friar already included us in the economy. On this level, right? To recognize that even in the economy, it is God who acts, if we let him live among us. But I also wanted to start by saying that on the farm, right? In our consecrated life, in the lives of the young people, right? We can very much keep in mind the community of the first Christians. In the community of the first Christians, we've often heard that they held everything in common. No one considered anything as their own, but shared everything for the good of all, so that there would be no one in need, so that everyone could be happy. So this is a principle that should guide our economy. Then we connected economy with communion, because the foundation of the economy is precisely communion. It might seem like the opposite, but it is actually communion, as Frey mentioned in the introduction. First, we know that we need to work. This is something we teach to those in recovery, just as we need to live it ourselves. Work. St. Paul was very firm about this. He said that he did not want to be a burden to the community where he lived. So St. Paul worked, he built networks. St. Paul worked and set an example in the community where he lived. And he firmly said that those who do not work should not eat. So the principle of work must be very strong within our hearts. On the farm, we must work. The first step is for everyone to commit themselves to work, according to their abilities and possibilities, but to truly commit to work. Then yes, we simply wait for the Almighty God among us to do his divine part, and we know he always does. Communion is fundamental. Working alone, whether in families or in our own lives, working alone sometimes produces few fruits because we cannot work just to support ourselves. We have to support the whole farm, an entire structure, and that's a lot. So we might wonder, how do we do that? If so many industries are shutting down and everything, how do we do that? And then the friar reminded us of this principle of communion. And it's true. It is communion, it is the presence of God among us that makes it possible for this to exist. This economy. So now I'll share a bit about my own life, about the steps I took toward this communion. I remember back in the parish, when we started at the parish, I remember the first day I felt a strong urge to live out this communion because, as we've said and told many times, we used to visit the poor, we used to visit the sick. And every time I made those visits, I felt a great joy. Today I know that what I was experiencing was the presence of Jesus among us when we made those visits. And I felt a joy that opened my heart, that made my heart generous. So easily, I could help. I could put my savings at their disposal. I could set aside part of my salary, which I didn't use at home because I lived with my mother, and make it available. Because we had a joy that I had with that group, with those things we did, and it was God who gave it. Once the friar said that we are like castaways at sea, right? When he is overwhelmed by the terrifying fear of drowning, he desperately clings onto a piece of wood which could represent the material possessions and worldly goods that we often hold on to in our own lives. But when a ship arrives, he gets on board the ship. He might still hold on to the piece of wood for a while, but then he'll let go. because he sees that he's already safe. This happens to all of us when we discover this life of God within us and among us. We feel so secure, so happy, that we no longer need to hold on to our possessions, our salary, nothing. We become free. We can make things available because we believe that we have a Father who provides. I remember that I went through this process of growing in understanding God's love, understanding the power of Jesus among us, and gradually letting go of my things. Then I remember that, after I started doing this, we began within the women's community. And the life of Jesus among us intensified. The love among us grew stronger. And I no longer lived with my mother. So it was very natural for us to share everything we had in common. So I would share my salary. Luz would contribute her work skills. I remember, for example, that at that time we survived by making handicrafts. So Luz didn't know how to do handicrafts. What did she do? She would go downstairs, learn how to crochet from the sisters, and then come back up to teach the girls. So each one shared what she had. Luz had clothes, so she shared them. Everyone contributed what they had so that the community could get started. Today I feel that this still happens in many farms. People share what they have so that the fazenda can begin. And it's necessary to share what we have. We see that for Jesus to perform the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves, he needed that what was available be shared, that the boy would offer what he had, which that day were the loaves and the fish. And with that, he fed many people. So when the economy isn't doing well, we need to see if we have something saved up. How is our closet? Do we have a bank account that we haven't shared? If we have a provision that we received and that is set aside for some individual purpose. And if we share it, we experience a joy, a freedom that leads us to go deeper and deeper. I remember that later, as we deepened our community life, things grew and I retired. And when you retire, you receive some money. And then we discussed it together. How to put that money in, how to spend that money, which was ours, because I lived in that community. We worked together. I ate from that community. I received blessings from that community. So it was normal. To me, it was logical that it was normal. So we decided together how to spend that money. I remember that we considered, for example, buying the land next to the little house, so that in the future we could build a house. And how God blessed that, right? How God later brought so many things because of that. Because today we have a house there next door, which came about perhaps from giving what we had, which at the time wasn't much, but it was something we put in common. Then later, I remember, as more time went by, I started to feel another need. I really had to go through a purification to reach this other need, this new openness of soul. Because when we put our things in common, sometimes we do it, but we want to control where they go. Isn't that true? We want to say where things should go. Isn't that so? I remember, for example, already with some preparation when it was like, so what now? When I received the money from my savings account, I had a sister who was going through a difficult situation. So she asked if she could have a certain amount. Then I was very clear with her. I said, look, I can't decide. Because I live in a community and everything I have belongs to that community. Just like someone who gets married now has their own family, I had mine. So looking at it together, we saw that it wasn't the case. Because that venture she was involved in was the kind of thing that, it was a bottomless pit. So it wasn't the case, it wouldn't help her. And then we decided to tell her no. And for me, of course. It was painful at that moment. But as I later saw the results, how her life improved, she got rid of that business. And afterwards, we even helped her with less than she had asked for. But we helped. So I feel that this seeing together is something serious. It's feeling that it's no longer ours, that it belongs to Jesus among us, that it belongs to God, and that he does things. Thank you. Much greater because he sees what we cannot see. Then later there came a time as well, because in any case I was still managing my bank account since I received my salary and everything, right? So there came a time when we realized that other people should take care of the red. So that was when other people started to use that money. And of course I had other jobs to do. I couldn't do that job anymore. And other people started doing that job. And then I had to learn something new, which was to ask, to express my needs. Sometimes that's difficult, isn't it? Because we share not only our money, but we also share our needs. That was harder for me. I remember that ever since I was a child, I wanted to be independent. I started working very early, giving private lessons at home so I wouldn't have to ask. And then I realized it was a new phase. And today I ask with joy. If I need something, I ask for it. The other day I asked for a pair of jeans, didn't I? So there is this openness in us to give and to receive. Then came the time when my parents died and we received an inheritance. And then the inheritance, what are we going to do with it? It was that piece of land over by the pylons. Some of you know it. For a long time, that piece of land just sat there because we didn't have the money to do anything with it. We would pass by in front of it and dream, right, Louise? What could be done there? I even used to say, Louise, if I could build a chapel, if we could build a chapel, my father would be so happy. A chapel on his land, right? But we didn't have the money for that. And we needed to build our house right next door. We had bought the land and needed to build. So what did we do? We sold it. We sold the land and built our house. Of course, it wasn't just with that money. There were other things, because it opens the door of providence, you know? When you give what you have, it opens the door of providence. So one organization covered the construction, another gave us furniture. But even so, we still had to do something, and we sold that property. It's so beautiful, you wouldn't believe it. After so many years, 2 years ago, that property came back to us, right? Ronzia wanted to sell, and we realized together that the women's group had donated our old property over at Piloins to the homeless men. They needed it more than we did, right? Then we were like a place for screening, you know, somewhere more isolated, right? So what did we do? We realized together that we should buy it. So how did this property come back to us? With a pool, a house, a barbecue area, and a chapel. So I just wanted to say that it's always been a much greater joy to give than to receive. But receiving is also a joy. We were happy when we got that property back, so there's no fear, you know. Because of that gospel saying, give and it will be given to you. It is true, just like all the other words, it is also true. And if we want to experience it in our lives, we need to give without fear, give everything. When we give everything, we create an emptiness where God can enter with his happy providence. But God's providence is very much connected to communion and to having priorities in things, you know. Because sometimes we worry so much about the financial side and get lost in it. And sometimes we end up not doing things. I sometimes hear someone say, oh, but I have so many things to do. I have to take care of finances, so I can't focus on the spiritual side. I can't keep up with the kids and everything. But we know that if we seek first the kingdom of God, everything else will not be given by the daycare. And in this everything, it really means everything. So I remember, for example, the experience we had with the freezer in connection with our frozen food factory. I remember that when the person who put this idea in our heads came here, and while he was sitting there talking to us, Anderson and I just couldn't help but laugh out loud, right? We thought it was so absurd. When we finished, when the presentation was over, the friar called us over and said, you know, that it wasn't like that. He actually set us straight. First, because it wasn't charity. We would have ended up just the way we did. And second, because we need to believe. Then the friar really emphasized this, and we saw that he truly believed in it. And I started to dedicate myself. So many times I stayed up all night working on the projects that were needed to make the freeze point happen. And the factory, folks, it's a place of sanctification. We never gave up. That's something we need to learn, you know? When we receive something from God, when we start something on the farms, we can't give up. It's easy. Oh, this isn't working, so let's do something else. Then you end up with a bunch of things started but never finished. We felt that we had received a heritage from God because everything we receive on the farm is a heritage from God. And we need to manage that heritage as something given by God. And we felt that it should be the same with the factory. Are we not putting work above everything else? Above the spiritual side? But instead of seeking the kingdom of God, we're not putting sustenance first. So then, among ourselves, we agreed to have that morning dedicated to spirituality. We would suspend work for a morning and dedicate it to spirituality. This was so powerful, folks, that today it has become a tradition on the farms. Once a week, we suspend activities during that period. Each person does it in their own way to practice spirituality. And it is a constant process of sanctification. Now, for example, around the time of the Gincana, the godmothers arrived for Christmas. And we had a lot of bills to pay, several things to pay for, and no production. We had stock. But it wasn't the case to produce more because there was already stock, but we needed to sell it. So we gathered together to see, with Jesus among us, what to do. And then we thought, let's sell on the street. There are so many girls here now. Let's take advantage of the retreat breaks, have some work to clean up there. Some girls can do that, and others can go out to sell. And the girls went out to the street to sell, all those who were there. And it was a success. And I got excited. When the time for the Gincana came, the godmothers came to me and said, they can't go out to sell on the street anymore. And I just couldn't let go of that idea, you know? I said, okay, fine, you're going to have the Gincana and then your voices will be cut off. Because what happened? We couldn't do it. But at the same time, I also felt that we couldn't keep asking the girls anymore. So we stayed there looking for a solution, right? And then it came to us. Wow, there are a lot of godmothers there. If 2 of them, who are really good at it, came to call and sell kits at the house event, it was a success. The sales, it was really beautiful. And then there came a moment when we had made every effort, it was successful, we paid off several debts, but we still hadn't managed to finish paying for the high care. So I called Juliana and said, Juliana, the factory one worked out, yours didn't, the women's center didn't. Then Juliana got sad and Juliana asked, what should we do? I said, Juliana, put this out there for the girls. Fabiana isn't one of ours, you're not. With Jesus among them, with a nice big card, making it special, put it out there for them, that's it. Juliana is really shy about asking, right? But she put herself out there. Guys, it was so beautiful. The girls rushed to call their mothers, and one even called saying, look, is she really at the farm? Because she used to do this when she was away. She'd make something up so I'd send her money. Then we said, no, it's true. At the end of the afternoon, when they had the money and Juliana told everyone, it was such a joy for them, you know? Because they also experienced what it means to be given to. So sometimes we're afraid to ask, but we should share everything we have in common. We must share everything, without keeping anything hidden away. And then ask God for guidance, because He knows exactly where the things we need are. But then, Frey once said that St. Francis of Assisi used to do this very thing, which was to go out and ask other people for help. Because God often gives through people, and we need to ask, to have the courage to ask. We had this courage and saw. When we started at the parish, I remember that when Frey went to ask for a house for the poor, I'm not sure if you know that group of houses over there. People thought Frey was crazy for asking for a house, but he went anyway. But Frey didn't go there to ask in a demanding way. He went to love. He would go, sit together and talk. Then if he felt he could ask, he would ask. I'm certain that many people are in heaven because they gave, because they donated. If I give a house on earth, I have a house in heaven. God is very generous. God never lets generosity go unrewarded. So I think that many people today are in heaven because they gave a house. And those who call Brother Luco crazy should see it now. Because today it's not just a house that we receive, it's farms, isn't it? Farms that we can't even manage to occupy. But why? Because we have the courage to ask. He gave everything. He waits on God. Now, something very important as well. Sometimes we ask ourselves, but why do I have everything? I asked for it. And the money doesn't come. I've done everything and it still doesn't come. Then we need to ask ourselves, folks, this is very important. How are we living? Let me ask you, if two children are fighting, will their parents give them anything at that moment? Will they? No, they won't, folks. It's not the right time for the child to receive anything. It's the time for the child to learn to make peace, to lose, to love themselves, isn't it? The same goes for us. If Jesus isn't among us, if there isn't mutual love, we can't receive anything. God can't give it to us. Because that leader is saying that it's okay that we can keep fighting, that we can keep going without speaking to each other. Sometimes it even gets to the point where we stop talking to each other. Sometimes the difficulties run even deeper. But remember that at that moment, maybe God wants us to first give what is inside of us as well. How many things are there inside us that sometimes prevent us from having a good relationship, from having the presence of Jesus? We need to have the courage to look inside ourselves too. Sometimes we feel like we've already given everything, that there's nothing left. But there are still things inside us. One day, Cesar was reading about hidden things, things we sometimes aren't even aware of, but we have them and they're getting in the way. They're getting in the way. They're holding back the progress of the farm, they're affecting the finances, they're hindering providence. So it's time to really cry out to God, what is it that's keeping me from being able to connect with others? It's not about blame, it's not even a matter of guilt, you know. It's about having such a great openness to others that only God can create that space within us. And the friar explained, just the other day, right? How is he going to do it? Through suffering. Who here hasn't already felt a purification and will feel others in the future? I feel like we're going to experience many more. Why? Because each time we need to open our hearts even more. When we're born, the friar always says this, we're born with our hearts like this. At first there's room for mom and dad, then for our little friends. But we, who have to embrace the whole world, who have to go out into the whole world, we have to welcome everyone. So our hearts have to make a complete circle. And that hurts everyone. Every time we meet someone who is difficult for us, every time we face a challenge, it's God opening our hearts. And to open it, he has to take something out. We have to give something up. Luz, for example, to open her heart to this extent, has to give up marriage, has to give up the laundry, her parents. Others have to give up things in installments, you know? Sometimes even deeper things. I remember that I had to give things up. A lot of things that seemed harmless, but actually got in the way of relationships. I was rich in things I needed to lose. And sometimes only God knows. We aren't always aware, so we also have to ask God when things start to happen. And we don't understand, we shouldn't look for someone else to blame, but instead ask ourselves what's in our own hearts, you know? What is stopping things from flowing, from providence happening, from love growing, from vocations coming, you know? To seriously ask ourselves, here we are parents, right? And parents need to generate spiritual life and material life, because we can't live only on the spiritual. We need to eat to have a place to live. We need to have many things. We also need to generate material life, which comes from the spiritual. Sometimes we can't build a family, we can't create new relationships, and that's something God asks of us. Look, if I see, for example, the corner, right? How is it that the corner has volunteers today who give their lives there? I remember it like this, or the work itself. There are volunteers there today. I'll give you an example. When we went to the during the World Youth Day celebrations, Joãozinho invited a close friend of his named Sergio. And there we paid a lot of attention to him, Joãozinho as well. Everyone paid attention to him, and he didn't understand much, but we did it anyway. And there it produced a lawyer for the work today. With such compassion, he embraces the cause of the work. At the corner, we had that idea for breakfast, also because of the factory, to sell the factory's products so that the Women's Center could move forward. And today, it's not just a source of income, it's a place for relationships, for building connections. A pediatrician has already been there who stayed. He was so impressed with our lives, with one of the girls who helped his daughter ride in a cart. She was afraid. And later, when we needed a pediatrician for that same girl, he said, "I'll do everything." And there was also the lady, Aunt Teresa. We call her aunt because she's Sergio's aunt, so she became our aunt too, right? She went there, fell in love with the life, and started dedicating 1 day a week. And today, guys, just so you know, she rented or bought, I'm not sure, an apartment right near the corner so she could take care of the corner. So in a short time, she made such a strong decision because she felt loved, because she felt it was a place where Jesus is present. Our farms have to be like that, folks. People who arrive at the farm should find something so beautiful that they fall in love with it, that they feel an answer in their hearts, because today everyone is searching for that. If you find it, you will love it. And from there comes providence as well. But providence is free in giving, and it makes us much freer. It gives you a freedom that nowhere else in the world can offer. Today, when we travel, we feel like this. We don't have a house, we don't have a car, we don't have a father and a mother. We have 1,000 houses, 1,000 fathers, 1,000 mothers, 1,000 brothers, 1,000 children. Why is that? Because we gave. So to those who give, it will be given. Now, creating this relationship, of course, it demands something from us. Look, let me share an experience of mine with you, just so you can understand. The other day, we were going to have a gathering at home, a festive one and all that. Then, after a while, I found out that Luz had invited someone, you know? So I thought, oh man, first I went to the chapel and prayed for God to open my heart. But I was like, so stuck in my old ways that God couldn't find a way to open it. Then I came back and said, Lucia, did you really have to invite that person? Then Lucy said, Garcinia, you look really tired, don't you? Then I said, it's not just that, Lucy, but you had to invite me. Then Lucy said, yeah, Maria Zita, I'm sorry. If I had known it would be so hard for you, I wouldn't have invited you, but now I already did. Then I said, that's true, isn't it? Then guys, I suddenly felt a new energy after I told her, you know. When the person arrived, well, people actually, since there were several, I sat at their table and started building relationships, you know. It was so beautiful. On the contrary, when they left, I was so happy. They asked me, but Jesus, what was going to get in the way, right? Look, and going back a bit, for example, when Frey started at Rede Vida, started with aid to the church in need, because, you know, Frey needed to find more things to do, right? Today we see what a gift it is, right, Frey? So many things. We have the program on Rede Vida that does so much good. Why is that? Because Frey dedicated himself to helping them, right? Aid to the church in need. We are a priority project of aid to the church in need, but how did they get to know the farm? Through Frey, through Lucy, who is also there today. So, you know, not having a selfish spirit. This is ours, this territory is ours, this meeting is ours, this, I don't know, it's ours, you know. It's not ours. God didn't give it to us. God wants it to reach the ends of the earth. And we need to be open to that, even if it hurts. Doesn't it hurt to open something up? But we need to do it. For us to go to heaven, folks, in heaven there will be many more people than we know here. And our hearts have to be able to rejoice and be happy with everyone. We need to start practicing that here. So, does building relationships help the economy? It does. And how do you build relationships? With very simple things. I visit someone, I give someone a gift, I say thank you very much, I welcome someone who arrives, right? And so many other simple, small things that we're used to seeing Frei do, for example, Nelson and many others. So we need to do that. And then when we need it, we'll have it. And then make this enter everyone's hearts, you know? For example, even our employees. At the organization today, we have a meeting with the employees where we provide them with spiritual guidance. Of course, they need their salary at the end of the month, but they also need spiritual support, and we do that. And folks, we've already seen results. Deborah, as an employee, listened when Nelson shared his experience in Africa, and she went to Africa, right? Magda heard about the mission experience and went to Sergipe, right? She did the mission there with us, and so many other employees that we know now work in a different way. So have an open heart. Recently, when I visited the Philippines, I could talk about other farms, but I visited the Philippines just now, right? I was really impressed by the scale of what they have there, you know. First of all, they work. They work hard. Over there, they have fresh white rice, creamy milk, aged yellow cheese, various sweet treats, and even some traditional homemade cassava cake. They make use of everything and really work hard. He and the boys, because the boys feel like it's theirs. That's very important, that they feel like it's theirs, right? So they work hard there. And they work in a way that is productive. We also need to try to work in a way that is productive, right? To put our gifts to use there, right? So that it produces results. Then, guys, they have a community around them that participates. They are poor people, but what do? They go to pray the rosary at these people's houses, you know, once a week. This makes them open up to that way of life. So much so that to start the women's group, there's already a volunteer there. She's 12 years old, guys. I asked her, why do you want to go to the farm, right? Why are you going to take part in the women's farm? She gave 3 reasons. First, because they pray there. Second, because it's beautiful. Third, because she's happy there. Look, guys, these are deep criteria that we need to look for in our farm. If people feel happy, if it's loving, and if there's prayer, right? And she wants to. Then they even have a ministry for the sick, you know? The sick go there, ask to be taken to the hospital, and they build relationships. And this makes, it's not that it's easy among them, no. They're very different. A German, more reserved, right? With someone who's super outgoing, isn't that true? A family that has its own problems, that has a child who cries all day long, right? A little one. I think she stopped crying already, right? So, but there are the sisters, people who come from a congregation, right? Who have an entire life story. Living a life of unity there requires dying to oneself from all sides. And that's why there's so much life, isn't it? To the point that the bishop people told us that the farm there brought a new way of life to Basbatin Island. Which comes from what people? It comes from the presence of Jesus among them. So, if I had to say something to you about the economy, there's a lot that could be said, right? But there isn't enough time, we can't go on too long. I would say, live in communion and have Jesus among you, right? If you have these 2 things, nothing will be lacking. You won't lack material things, you won't lack spiritual things, and you won't lack joy, okay?